inside the Good Morning America studio feels too clean to be real. Bright lights slicing through the artificial calm, smiles rehearsed to perfection. The morning sun outside Manhattan glints off the glass towers, but inside, something raw is about to erupt. Cameras roll, the red light blinks. The country wakes up to another polished broadcast. And then Samuel L. Jackson leans forward. His voice is steady, deep, unfiltered. You know what's funny, Mike? People love to talk about truth until it walks right into their studio. The words land like a thunderclap. A producer in the control room jerks upright. Someone whispers, cut to commercial. But no one moves fast enough. Michael Strahan's trademark grin falters for half a second. The kind of flicker you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. He laughs, a soft, nervous sound, and replies, "Well, Sam, we just try to keep things positive around here." Jackson's eyes don't waver. Positive. He repeats, "That's one word for pretending." A gasp ripples through the crew. One of the co-hosts shifts in her chair, the tension audible even through the microphone. The audience, sensing the shift, stops clapping. The energy turns electric, too sharp, too real. "Did you just say that on national television?" A voice blurts from off camera. Jackson doesn't flinch. He doesn't smile. He just sits there, breathing evenly. Like a man who's been waiting his entire life to say something everyone else was too afraid to. Strahan's eyes dart toward the control booth. The camera hesitates between them, trembling slightly in the operator's hands. Someone finally yells, "Go to break." The screen flickers. A jingle plays. And just as the shot dissolves into the network's logo, the last image the audience sees is Samuel L. Jackson staring straight into the lens, calm, unblinking, unashamed for a heartbeat. The broadcast freezes mid-frame. The silence afterwards is deafening. Social media hasn't seen it yet. The headlines haven't been written. The world doesn't know what it just witnessed. But inside that studio, everyone does. And something unscripted just cracked the surface of America's morning smile. And what led to this moment? The one that ended with Samuel L. Jackson being escorted off Good Morning America began hours before the cameras even rolled. Hours earlier, the sun was barely up over Midtown Manhattan, inside the glass corridors of ABC's headquarters. The day felt ordinary, too ordinary for what was about to unfold. Samuel L. Jackson arrived early, coat collar turned up against the chill, a quiet storm in a tailored suit. He'd done this 1,000 times before. Press junkets, talk shows, all smiles and sound bites. But something in him was already restless. In a side room off the studio floor, a young PR handler handed him a mug of coffee and a list of talking points. "Keep it light," she said softly. "Keep it fun. No politics, please. The network's been edgy lately." She smiled like it was a joke, but her eyes weren't joking. Jackson looked down at the paper, a neat lineup of safe questions. Career highlights, favorite co-stars, box office buzz. He nodded once, folded the sheet, and slipped it into his pocket without looking up. "Don't worry," he said with a half smile. "I always keep it real." Out on the main floor, the production crew adjusted lights and cables, whispering in low tones. One of them muttered, "I hope he doesn't bring up that thing from last week." Another replied, "It's Jackson. He always brings up that thing in the control booth." A producer reviewed the rundown. "Well, stick to promo talk," she said, tapping the script. No curve balls. Strahan will steer it if it goes off track. The others nodded, but their eyes betrayed the same unease. Everyone knew Samuel L. Jackson didn't do scripted smiles. Down the hall, Jackson sat in makeup, silent, watching himself in the mirror. The makeup artist dabbed powder on his forehead. "You excited?" she asked. He met her eyes through the mirror, voice low. "Excited? Nah, I'm just tired of pretending." Outside, AIM 5E sign flickered to life. The crew hustled into position, unaware they were minutes away from morning television history. The PR handler peeked from behind the curtain, whispering a last warning. "Just remember, they like it happy." Jackson stood, smoothed his jacket, and smiled the kind of smile that hides a truth too heavy to stay buried. When the cameras went live, Jackson didn't just go off script, he rewrote the entire segment. Section 3, antagonist backstory. The polished face of Control 400 words. Michael Strahan had built a career on charm. The kind that disarms, smooths over, and never offends. America adored him because he was easy to love. The wide smile, the effortless laugh, the way he could make even awkward pauses feel friendly. He was the perfect bridge between the raw edge of sports and the soft glow of morning television. After the NFL, he traded shoulder pads for a suit and microphone, mastering a new kind of game. One played not on turf, but under studio lights. The rules were simple: stay liable, stay neutral, stay safe. Every guest, every topic, every glance at the camera had to fit the brand. Producers called it, bro, the pew. Strahan called it the job. Behind that famous grin, though, there was a quiet pressure. Sponsors, executives, audience metrics, all whispering the same thing: don't stir the water. Every segment had been rehearsed, timed, approved. And when a guest strayed too far from the script, it was Strahan's job to steer them back, gently, humorously, without a ripple. He was good at it, too good. That's why the network trusted him. But across from him sat a man who'd spent a lifetime fighting to be heard without being softened. Samuel L. Jackson had been told in 1,000 different ways to tone it down. Not angry, passionate, not political, careful, not too loud, not too raw. The world had tried to polish him the way it had polished Strahan, and he'd refused. That morning, the contrast was unmissable. One man scripted by the system, the other standing outside of it. Strahan didn't mean harm. He was simply doing what the machine demanded. Yet, in that dynamic, and he became something larger, the face of control disguised as kindness. And when their worlds collided under the glare of national television, it wasn't about two men at a table. It was about two versions of truth, one curated, one inconvenient. Strahan leaned into his role, smiling through the tension, convinced he could keep things light. But when he tried to steer the conversation away from truth, Samuel L. Jackson gave an answer that shattered the script and the studio. Section 40, protagonist backstory. The unfiltered voice, 900 words, long before the bright lights of Hollywood. Before red carpets and award shows, Samuel L. Jackson was a young man standing in the crowd of the civil rights movement. Eyes wide, fists clenched, heart burning with questions the world didn't want answered. He wasn't watching history, he was living it. The marches, the speeches, the moments of defiance against systems built to silence people who looked like him. Those weren't distant stories. They were his formation. That fire never left. It simply evolved. When the cameras finally turned his way, Jackson brought that same defiance into every frame, every role, every interview. His career wasn't built on image. It was built on truth. From Do the Right Thing to Pulp Fiction. From Nick Fury's authority to Django's vengeance, he played men who spoke the things others swallow. Each line carried weight because it came from a man who'd earned the right to say it. Hollywood tried to polish him, the way it polishes everyone. Publicists would whisper, "Don't say that. Keep it friendly. Smile a little more." But Samuel L. Jackson never fit into their mold. He didn't filter. He didn't bend. He didn't trade conviction for comfort. In interviews, when journalists fumbled around questions about race, power, or politics, he would lean forward and say exactly what millions were thinking, but didn't have the platform to say. "If you can't speak truth when you have the mic," he once said, "what's the point of having one?" That line became more than a quote. It became his creed. He wasn't just an actor anymore. He was a mirror reflecting the frustration, resilience, and pride of people who'd been told for generations to be grateful, quiet, and compliant. When Samuel spoke, the world listened, not because he was famous, but because he was fearless. Every controversy, every headline, every viral moment only reinforced what he stood for. When a reporter asked him why he kept bringing race into everything, Jackson didn't flinch. "Because it's already in everything," he said calmly. "You just don't see it because it doesn't affect you." That honesty earned him as many critics as it did admirers. But to those who'd lived on the margins, immigrants chasing opportunity, workers overlooked by the system, communities carrying centuries of unspoken pain, Jackson was more than a celebrity. He was validation, proof that speaking your truth, no matter how uncomfortable, was an act of freedom. He carried that responsibility with a quiet pride. When cameras weren't rolling, he mentored young Black actors, reminding them not to let anyone rewrite their voice. He visited schools, spoke at universities, and used every stage he could to remind people that authenticity wasn't arrogance. It was survival. Still, the industry didn't always know what to do with him. Sponsors wanted someone less political. Studios wanted someone more flexible. Jackson just kept showing up as himself. "They can't fire the truth," he'd say with that signature grin, half humor, half challenge. Over time, even those who'd once dismissed him began to see that his defiance wasn't rebellion for its own sake. It was integrity. When he said a line, you believed it because it wasn't performance. It was conviction wrapped in character. That was his gift, to make truth entertaining enough to slip past people's defenses. And yet, despite decades of unfiltered honesty, the morning he walked into Good Morning America would be different. There was something about the glossy set, the scripted questions, the polite laughter echoing off the studio walls. It all felt like a stage built for pretending. And Samuel L. Jackson had outgrown pretending. He wasn't angry that morning. He was resolved. The country was shifting. Conversations about race, media control, and cultural authenticity were boiling over. He felt it in every interview, every online debate. Every time someone asked him to just stick to acting. The world was watching celebrities more than leaders. And Jackson knew the power of that spotlight. In his mind, if he had a mic, it wasn't for promotion. It was for purpose. He'd seen what silence cost. He'd seen what happened when people swallowed truth for the sake of staying comfortable. And he wasn't about to do that. Not after everything he'd witnessed. Not after the decades it took to earn a platform that couldn't be taken from him. That morning, he didn't plan to start a fight. He just refused to lie. And maybe that's what made what happened next inevitable. Because when truth sits across from comfort, one of them always cracks first. And on that morning, as the studio lights brightened and the countdown began, his truth was about to collide with the bright lights of corporate television. And the sparks would ignite a national conversation. The Good Morning America intro music fades beneath a wave of polite applause. The studio hums with its usual cheer. A 1,000-watt smile economy built on keeping mornings positive. Michael Strahan sits center stage, hands folded neatly on the desk, his voice smooth as honey. Joining us today, he says, turning toward the guest chair. The legendary Samuel L. Jackson, one of the greatest actors of our time, here to talk about his new film. Jackson flashes a small smile, a professional one, the kind that satisfies the PR checklist. Appreciate you having me, Mike. They exchange pleasantries. A clip rolls from the movie, laughter, applause, safe terrain. But as the segment continues, Strahan leans in just slightly tone casual. You've always been outspoken, Sam. Sometimes people say maybe too outspoken. You ever worry about that, especially in today's climate? The question hangs in the air. Jackson takes a breath, eyes narrowing. You mean the climate where people pretend things are better than they are? The audience gives a polite laugh, unsure if they're supposed to. Strahan chuckles along. No, I just mean, keeping things light for viewers. Jackson tilts his head. Light's good, but truth's better. The words settle like thunder. He continues, his voice calm but heavy. People keep saying Hollywood's changed, that we're past the old stuff. But ask any black actor who isn't me if that's true. The doors might look open, but they still decide who gets to walk through. A ripple runs through the studio. Strahan shifts in his chair, fingers tightening around his cue cards. Somewhere behind the cameras, a producer waves both hands, wrap it, move on, pivot. Strahan forces a laugh. Well, we don't want to get too heavy. Sam, it's Friday morning. People are still waking up. Jackson doesn't blink. His gaze moves past Strahan, past the cameras, right into the lens, into America itself. Too heavy, he says softly. It's reality. People are tired of pretending. The silence is instant and absolute. Even the air seems to pause. Someone coughs off camera. The control room scrambles for a commercial cue. Strahan straightens, the practice's charm slipping for the first time. I hear you, he says quickly, but we're just. Jackson cuts in, not angry, not loud, just unfiltered. You hear me? But will you say it? The words hit harder than a shout. In the booth, a producer mouths, cut to break. But it's too late. The audience has already leaned in. Across the country, millions watching feel it. That moment when conversation becomes confrontation, when politeness gives way to truth. Strahan's eyes flick toward the camera, his voice rising in forced ease. Well, speaking of reality, we'll be right back. But the tension has already broken through the screen. And that's when Astrakhan made the mistake that turned a heated debate into a full-blown showdown. Section 6. The mic drop counterattack. 600 words. Michael Strahan straightens in his chair. The smooth talk show rhythm flickering back into place like muscle memory. His voice regains its polish, the kind reserved for sponsors, for keeping the nation's coffee drinkers comfortable. Now, Ed Sam, he says, with an almost parental calm, we just try to keep things positive here. People tune in to escape all that heavy stuff. You know how it is. Folks want to start their morning with a smile. Jackson's expression doesn't change. He lets the words hang in the air until they start to sound hollow. The studio is quiet. Too quiet for morning television. Then, softly, he replies, "Positivist doesn't mean silence, Mike." A pause. Astrakhan's smile stiffens. Jackson leans forward just enough for his voice to fill the space between them. You can smile while you lie. That's the problem with TV. The words hit like a slow detonation. Somewhere off camera, a stagehand exhales sharply. The co-host's eyes dart between them, panic creeping in behind the practice's poise. Astrakhan tries to laugh it off. Come on, man, nobody's lying here. Jackson interrupts, calm but surgical. When you tell people everything's fine, while it's not, that's a lie. When you tell folks not to talk about struggle because it's too heavy, that's a lie too. The control booth erupts in whispers. Cut to break, but the camera operator hesitates, locked in the tension. America is watching. Wide awake now. Astrakhan clears his throat. We're just trying to focus on what brings people together. Jackson nods. So do I. Truth brings people together, Mike. Real unity doesn't come from pretending. It comes from understanding what we're actually dealing with. He glances briefly at the audience, a mix of curiosity and disbelief flickering across faces. Then he looks straight into the camera, his tone turning personal. You can't heal what you refuse to name. And you can't fix a system that only smiles when it's winning. A cough breaks the silence. Someone drops a pen off screen. The live chat on the network's streaming feed begins to explode. He's right. They're cutting him off. Let the man speak. Clips start circulating before the segment even ends. Phones in the audience catching every second. Astrakhan's eyes dart toward the teleprompter. He's losing control of the narrative, and he knows it. Let's maybe take a step back, he says, tone tightening. This show's about connection, not confrontation. Jackson's voice drops lower, firm, deliberate. Connection is confrontation when you're honest about it. For a moment, neither of them moves. The air hums with the kind of silence that only follows truth too big to swallow. Then Jackson delivers the line that freezes the entire set. If telling the truth makes people uncomfortable, he says evenly, maybe it's not the truth that needs to change. The audience gasps. Then an applause breaks out. Hesitant at first, then building like a wave. Some clap out of admiration, others out of sheer disbelief. But it's real, unprompted, unscripted. Astrakhan sits motionless, his perfect posture suddenly human. The control room screams through headsets, the director waving for commercial like his life depends on it. The screen flickers, a desperate cut to the network logo, the music cue stumbling in half a beat too late. But in that frozen instant, Before the broadcast dissolves into polished graphics and jingles, one image remains: Samuel L. Jackson, calm and composed, staring into the lens like he just told the world a secret it already knew, but refused to hear. And as the applause fades under the sudden silence of the commercial break, one thing is certain: the segment may have ended, but the moment had just begun. Because the instant the show cut to commercial, chaos erupted behind the scenes. The commercial ended, but the damage, or the awakening, was already done. By the time the show returned from break, Samuel L. Jackson was gone. Security, moving with the stiff politeness of people who knew they'd be on camera, had quietly escorted him out of the studio. Strahan sat alone at the table, the smile long gone, replaced by the kind of silence that couldn't be filled with another segment about pumpkin spice or celebrity weddings. The network cut to a recorded interview, pretending nothing had happened. But outside those studio walls, the world was already watching and replaying. Within minutes, clips of Jackson's words began flooding every corner of the internet. You can smile while you lie. That's the problem with TV. The quotes spread like wildfire, turning into captions, remixes, reaction videos. TikTok users stitched themselves over the footage, nodding, clapping, crying. On X, the hashtag #FentSamuelSpeaksTruth surged past 1 million posts before noon. Finally, someone said it. One tweet read, "He just ended fake TV in under a minute," another declared. Screens across the country lit up with one man's truth, raw, unedited, unstoppable. Meanwhile, inside ABC's headquarters, chaos ruled. Producers were livid, pacing the control room like generals after a mutiny. Sponsors called, threatening to pull ads. Emails flew with words like damage control, containment, reputation risk. Someone suggested cutting the replay from online platforms, but it was already too late. The internet had made the moment immortal. Every news outlet wanted a piece of it. Morning pundits debated whether Jackson had crossed a line. Entertainment blogs labeled him Hollywood's loose cannon. Political commentators called it a masterclass in authenticity. For every critic, 10 defenders rose up, quoting him, sharing his clips, turning his defiance into a movement. By evening, celebrities had joined the conversation. Viola Davis posted, "Truth isn't heavy, it's necessary." Denison Washington reposed the clip with a single word: respect. Others were less kind. Anonymous studio insiders whispered to tabloids that Jackson had ambushed the show. One headline read, "Isa Mal L, JK Sauce, Livey Mal, and Dobod Nam Workam I penning." But Jackson didn't argue, he didn't explain. Instead, late that night, he tweeted just 5 words: "Can't silence reality. Not anymore." It was retweeted 500,000 times in an hour. The next morning, every major network ran the footage, the very clip ABC had tried to bury. Think pieces filled digital front pages. Some called it a reckoning in real time. Others said it was proof that live TV still had the power to expose the truth, even when the truth wasn't scheduled. Jackson's calm, unbothered face from that final shot became an emblem, printed on shirts, shared as memes, turned into street murals overnight. College students used his words in protests. Podcasters dissected every line like scripture. The message had broken containment, crossing borders, languages, and demographics. In barbershops, classrooms, and subway stations, people repeated the line that started it all. Positivist doesn't mean silence. ABC released a statement by afternoon. Sterile, corporate, safe. They praised Jackson's passion, but reminded audiences that Good Morning America was a program focused on uplifting entertainment. It didn't matter. The audience had already chosen its narrative. Strahan, caught in the middle, released no statement at all. Some defended him as a man just doing his job. Others saw him as the symbol Jackson had named, the smiling gatekeeper of an empire that preferred comfort over truth. And in the midst of the digital storm, one thing became undeniable. The world had seen something real on live television. No filters, no edits, no corporate framing. Just one man refusing to swallow his words for the sake of sponsorship. For every headline calling it chaos, millions called it clarity. Because behind the trending tags and viral clips, something deeper had cracked. A collective awareness that maybe, just maybe, they'd all been watching a version of reality edited to keep them calm. And in that realization, Samuel L. Jackson's defiance turned into a mirror. The question echoing through living rooms, newsrooms, and boardrooms alike wasn't about what he said, but why it hit so hard. Because in the days that followed, one question lingered across America. Who really controls what we get to hear? Days later, when the frenzy began to quiet, something remarkable became clear. This was never just about a TV segment gone wrong. It wasn't even about Samuel L. Jackson or Michael Strahan. It was about something far bigger, something simmering beneath every carefully scripted broadcast. Every muted panel discussion, every moment when truth had been edited out in the name of balance. For years, television had sold comfort disguised as conversation. Smooth smiles, digestible takes, and a promise that everyone could feel good at the end of the hour. But that morning shattered the illusion. When Jackson refused to shrink, he cracked open a question the country had avoided for too long. What's the cost of pretending everything's fine when it isn't? Clips of the exchange continued to roll, but the focus began to shift. No longer just viral entertainment. It became a mirror reflecting back the state of public dialogue. Commentators who had mocked the outburst days before were now admitting something uncomfortable. It felt real. It felt necessary. On late night shows, comedians referenced it with awe instead of mockery. On podcasts, hosts discussed it as the moment authenticity fought back. Even the critics, the ones who'd called Jackson unprofessional, were quietly conceding that. For the first time in a long time, people had actually listened. A college professor in Atlanta told her class, what you witnessed was unscripted democracy, messy, loud, and absolutely vital. A truck driver in Texas filmed himself saying, man said what we all been thinking. Tired of fake smiles, tired of being polite about pain, and in a coffee shop in Chicago, a woman replayed the clip on her phone and whispered, finally, this wasn't a scandal. It was a spark. Because underneath all the noise, the sponsors, the pundits, the hashtags, lay a simple truth. Real conversation doesn't happen when everyone agrees. It happens when someone refuses to stay silent. Jackson had become that someone, not a hero in the Hollywood sense, but a reflection of the millions who'd swallowed words in boardrooms, classrooms, and dinner tables just to keep the peace. His defiance gave them permission to breathe again, to question the invisible script they'd been following. And what made it powerful wasn't anger. It was calm. He hadn't shouted, He hadn't stormed off. He had simply looked into the camera. That cold, unblinking eye of corporate media, and spoken like a man who had nothing left to lose and everything left to protect truth. The internet, for once, didn't move on. Instead, it started talking, really talking. Threads about censorship, conversations about image viz integrity, debates about what positivist means in a world still unequal, still aching for honesty. In living rooms, families who never discussed race were suddenly confronting it. In classrooms, teachers used the clip to teach about voice and power. Even in newsrooms, anchors began asking themselves who they were really serving, the viewers or the sponsors. Something had shifted. And maybe that's why, amid the memes and late night sketches, there was also reverence. Because deep down, everyone recognized the rare purity of that moment. A man speaking without approval, without permission, without fear. That kind of truth can't be contained when future documentaries recount the evolution of modern media. This moment will play in slow motion. The glint of stage lights, the calm defiance in Jackson's eyes, the frozen smile on Strahan's face. A frame that captured a turning point between the world as it was and the world that wanted to be heard. The moral wasn't complicated. It wasn't even new, but it felt reborn. Truth doesn't need a filter. Authenticity doesn't need an apology. And silence, no matter how well produced, is never the same thing as peace. In the echo of that broadcast, people began realizing something profound. They didn't just want to be entertained, they wanted to be respected. So when the networks tried to move on, the audience didn't. They shared, they commented, they demanded. Because Samuel L. Jackson hadn't just spoken his truth, he'd reminded them they had one too. And that's how it happens. How a flash of rebellion becomes a cultural reset. One man, one moment, one unfiltered sentence breaking through the static of manufactured smiles. The lesson: courage isn't about confrontation. It's about clarity, about daring to be real in a room built on pretending. And somewhere out there, as the world replayed his words for the 1,000th time, Jackson's quiet defiance echoed beyond screens and headlines, turning a fleeting clash into a permanent question. Because the story didn't end there. The internet turned this moment into a movement. The screen flickers, slow motion flashes of that morning play like fragments of memory. Jackson's calm stare, Strahan's uneasy smile, the sudden cut to commercial. Then the explosion, clips reposted, tweets igniting, headlines colliding. The world didn't just watch, it reacted. We see the montage unfold. Fans filming themselves quoting his words, crowds chanting, "Can't silence reality." Reporters replaying the moment frame by frame. A heartbeat builds beneath the narration, slow, steady, human, and over it, the voice returns. Steady, intimate, unafraid. We'll live in a world where truth costs fame, but silence costs your soul. Pause. Because this story, this firestorm, was never about one man's defiance on live television. It was about what happens when someone dares to say what others are trained to avoid. About the courage it takes to be unfiltered in a world addicted to polish. The lights fade, but the echo of his words remains. If telling the truth makes people uncomfortable, maybe it's not the truth that needs to change. That line becomes a challenge. To speak, to question, to refuse to settle for soft lies dressed as civility. The music swells, cinematic, rising like a call to arms. If you believe truth still matters, the narrator continues, share this story. Subscribe for more untold moments the networks don't want you to see. Because every time someone speaks up, another crack appears in the system built to keep us quiet. The final image freezes on Jackson's face. Eyes steady, then a heartbeat, then black. Resolve, motivation, loyalty. The truth doesn't fade when the lights go out. It only gets louder.